now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. Of course, we always begin here at home, as the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee, FAAC, has raised fresh concerns over huge unreconciled revenues, disclosing that more than $42.37 billion allegedly due from the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited to the Federation account remains unresolved. The committee noted that while NNPC insists that its deductions are legitimate and in line with the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, and other laws, state governments and fiscal authorities continue to contest the figures. The $42.37 billion in question stems from alleged under-remittances by NNPC, a matter that has been dragging on for years. Specifically, the alleged under-remittances cover 2011 to 2017, according to the document. During the meeting, NNPC presented details of exploration activities carried out from 1999 to date and outlined its 2025 plans. However, stakeholders demanded greater clarity on the utilization of the funds. At the same time, the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation has been tasked to account for over 2.03 trillion naira in outstanding payables relating to taxes and royalties. Now we shift our attention to River State, as the immediate past River State Administrator, Vice Admiral Ibok Ete Ibas, retired, and the Rivers State House of Assembly may be gearing up for a showdown. This follows the latter's decision to probe the state's expenditure over the last few months under the former sole administrator. Ibas ceased to be the administrator of the oil-rich state on September 17th, following the end of the 6-month emergency rule, after President Bola Tinubu directed the suspended state governor, Siminalayi Fubara, his deputy, and the State House of Assembly members to return to office. The River State House of Assembly, presided over by the Speaker, Martin Ameole, during its first plenary after the end of emergency rule, said that it would investigate the state expenditure during the 6 months of emergency rule. Reacting to the House of Assembly's move to probe expenditure under his tenure, Ibas said the lawmakers lacked the power to investigate him, pointing out that they didn't appoint him as the administrator of the state. Ibas said it was understandable that, having been away from the business of legislation for a while, that the lawmakers were merely trying to make an effort to discharge their functions. He, however, described the lawmakers' resolve as commentary, adding that the attempt to probe the former administrator was tantamount to probing the president who appointed him, as well as the National Assembly, which supervised the activities of Ibas as the state administrator, as he then was. Certainly, Rufai, as we thought that calm and peace and some sort of sanity would be returned to River State, it looks like there's something new brewing, and rightfully so.
With respect, I don't think there's anything brewing in River State. I think the shenanigan is just continuing. The other day, when the lawmakers said they were going to probe what was happening in River State, I knew it was a joke, it was a ruse. There was nothing there. They just wanted to act in such a way so that people would say, they are doing something. They cannot probe Ibas. It happened under a state of emergency, which was an aberration as orchestrated by President Tinubu. And now Nyesom Wike has also said, okay, it was part of the plot, because his words, not mine. He said that if we wanted the state of emergency to continue, I would have made it continue. So we all know the aberration. And that monies went under the drain, that they will couch it under emergency rule, and they can say it's for emergency expenditure. So it's all part of the joke we see in this country. I'm sorry, the state of emergency, when you look at it, it also benefited the same National State House of Assembly that said they want to probe somebody, because it was in favor of their faction, really, when you look at it. So there's nothing there. It's all part of the charade. You see, there are many smoke screens in Nigeria. People talk on the face of newspaper outlets or television and the likes, and say all sorts just to be able to get Nigerians excited. I'm sure the lawmakers probably heard the zeitgeist from people that say, we must probe the, Ibok Ete Ibas administration, and they said, okay, let's just repeat that in the State House of Assembly to make people feel good. And they've repeated it now. Nothing is going to come out of it. It's part of the joke that happens in Nigeria. But I think the formative thing that is very sad about River State is that such an aberration occurred, and the Supreme Court didn't deem it fit to hear it. People over the weekend have spoken up about it. I think the latest reaction is that of Chidi Odekalu, that was also berating the Supreme Court like we've called them out. The fact that things like this happen, in fact, even Femi Falana berated them over the weekend. That's such an important matter of national importance. The president declared a state of emergency at a time when visible to our eyes, we didn't see any security threat, which we know was to settle scores, which a certain minister was beating his chest after the declaration of the state of emergency that he won in this political impasse. And the Supreme Court could not hear the case. But the same Supreme Court was quick to hear, in about a little over 2 months, the case of that same Rivers State as it pertains to the local government elections. And they quickly gave a determination on it when it was in favor of a particular political side. So that's the sad part of the country, And we'll never stop talking about that because, you see, it will be said that we spoke up for our democracy. And we said it the way it had to be said. That's the part I will always say. We don't care whose ox is God. We don't care who's not going to feel happy we saying this. It has to be said because it's the truth, and the truth is always hard. Secondly, as regards remittances, it's not today we've been talking about NNPC and remittances and all of that. If they say it dates back to 2011, there's been a lot of talk. But the question is, have we been able to forensically audit the accounts before we cry foul? Because we all remember how some people cried that there was some monies not remitted by the NNPC over 20 billion. Then on forensic audit, the money kept on reducing. Now we've gotten to a point where they're saying there's a 2 trillion naira somewhere on over 40 billion. The NNPC too should come forward and let's all reconcile the books so we see where the dead bodies are buried and if there are no dead bodies buried so that we can reconcile the account. And I think it's after the point in time like this. I yield the floor.
Okay, the main issue that we're dealing with this morning is about accountability. Accountability is very important in governance process. It is also at the heart of the democratic process. Where there is no accountability, then you do not have a government of representatives. What you have is a government of individuals pursuing their personal interests. Let us start with NNPC. Now, in the case of the NNPC, there has been a long issue about opaqueness of NNPC accounts. There have been issues about state governors saying what they get from FAAC is not what they should get. Now, FAAC then decided to set up. That FAAC is the Federal Allocation Committee of Revenue within the collectible pot under Section 162 of the 1999 Constitution. So they now set up a subcommittee to say, okay, what is missing? As NNPC been faithful in terms of remittances? Because the governors are saying, no, NNPC has not been remitting funds. It's simply about accountability. Now, the second part of it is what they call allocations. Something allocation, which is about frontier funds. There's something called frontier funds. Exploration funds, rather. Exploration funds with regard to frontier exploration. Dahomey Basin, Benue Trough, Gongola Basin, Chad Basin. Now, NNPC has consistently said, under the PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, they can retain some funds to pursue exploration. So I think that the government has a responsibility to ask questions about accountability. Okay, these frontier funds, these exploration funds, what did you do? What did you do in Benue Trough? What did you do in Chad Basin? What did you do in Dahomey Basin? What did you do in the Gongola Basin? How much was spent? Everybody had always said, oh, opaqueness about, how NNPC Limited, which is a growing concern, disburses money. That money does not belong to the Ministry of Finance. It does not belong to the federal government of Nigeria. It belongs to the people of Nigeria. Where was the National Assembly? The National Assembly slept on its rights. However, to summarize the issue about FAAC allocation and exploration funds. Now, we have a very strange situation in Nigeria, whereby institutions of state do not function. Whether it's the National Assembly or is the office of the Accountant General, or the office of the Auditor General? These are some of the departments of state that should be finger-pointed. Now they will go and look for consultants, some imbeciles, I use that word advisedly, who say they are consultants. They are the ones who will say, oh, they are looking for where government money is missing, revenue is missing, we are torchlighting government revenue. In serious-minded countries where institutions function, the office of the Attorney General will function. The office of the Accountant General will function. The National Assembly will function. They will be the ones who will monitor the process. But we don't monitor any process here because everybody down the line is corrupt. They are running a government of individuals rather than a government of the people. And then somebody comes along later in the day, some consultant will say, oh, I've noticed money is missing here. Those consultants, they are not patriots. What they are looking for is their own cut from the money. So these are the issues that we have to think about in terms of accountability. So I do not take what is reported in the papers on its face value. I raised the question about accountability. And that same question is about rivers. Ibokete Ibas, Vice Admiral, is saying nobody can probe him. Look, I respect military officers because they are usually well trained, like Catholic priests. They send them to school. They train them. They give them exposure. An ordinary military officer of Nigeria is a well-educated man at the officer level. So what is Ibokete Ibas saying? He's saying he's accountable only to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. That's a very ignorant, unintelligent, uneducated thing to say. I believe he must be intelligent enough to know that when you manage a process in Nigeria, you can be called upon to account. So his argument that the House of Assembly of Rivers State cannot question him is illiterate, and he must be so informed in case he doesn't watch television. What the House of Assembly of Rivers State has said is that, look, yes, within the purview of the Constitution, the National Assembly can make laws, but they don't have evidence that the over 400 billion that was spent within 6 months, that the National Assembly had oversight. That money belongs to the people of Rivers State. Ibokete Ibas must give account. He cannot say that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu gave him mandate. He cannot give him mandate to spend money anyhow. Even President Tinubu does not have that right under the Nigerian Constitution. Section 305, the way President Tinubu went about it, having been declared illegal, unconstitutional, and unjustified. So who is Ibokete Ibas to come and say nobody can ask him questions? The people of Rivers State, they have the right to ask questions about how their money was spent. And he must be prepared to give proper account. So Martin Amewule, and his colleagues in the House of Assembly, they are representatives of the people of Rivers. And the people of Rivers State cannot have an illegal situation in which somebody came around, spent 6 months, and he will come around and say, I don't need to give account to you. I have fulfilled the mandate that President Tinubu gave me. No, President Tinubu does not determine the nature of Nigerian democracy. That's why it's called the government of the people, and the representatives of the people should stand up and ask questions. If they fail at the level of the National Assembly, we should encourage the people in Rivers State to ask questions. That, in my view, is the issue.
Absolutely. You know, we're fond of saying government is a continuum, but when it comes to accountability, when it comes to giving account for what we have done during our time in office, suddenly there's a myopic view around my tenure, my term. However, like Dr. Abati has said so eloquently, This gentleman, under his caretaker period, under his stewardship, Rivers State enjoyed, on average, about 40 billion per month from FAAC revenues. Now, a lot of that, we are aware, of course, is from the 13% derivation fund. What does that tell you? This is money that is coming from the nation's wealth, from the sovereign wealth, from the natural resources that Nigeria was endowed with by God, that no man can claim to own, or no man can claim to have a final say over. Those are resources that are supposed to be enjoyed by every single Nigerian freely as a birthright, a God-given right. Now, it becomes challenging when somebody feels that they don't need to give account for such a massive largesse, especially as those of the people of Rivers State are beginning to question the fact that some of the projects that were supposed to be obvious and evident for them to see that emerged from this 6-month period are non-existent. For example, we know that one of the primary projects was the rehabilitation or the reconstruction of the State House of Assembly. They say that it was touched, but there's no real progress being made there. What about the other projects that had been met on ground that we would have liked to have seen some sort of progress with, some sort of development? Now there's a great trend of governors who like to go around and commission and unveil all that they have done. We would have thought that the transition period of the sole administrator would have been one where he could show us and tell us what it is that he has done in the last 6 months, as opposed to giving us public lectures and giving us Thanksgiving services and talking about peace. Beyond peace, which is of course very important, is the fact that there's money that was spent. Now, there are also accusations coming out of the same state as reported by the New Telegraph newspaper that some of the civil servants are accusing him of ill treatment. One of his wins that he says he made while he was in office is that he was able to do a 5 billion naira verification with regards to pensions and wages. And some of the civil servants in Rivers State are saying that this is inaccurate, that this is all shrouded with a degree of corruption, and that they're still ghost workers and an overinflated wage bill in the past 6 months. Now, he has to answer these questions because these are all allegations. So who is going to respond? Now, if he's saying he's accountable to the president or accountable to the National Assembly, that's all fair and fine. But none of those office holders are above the laws of Nigeria. And sincerely, none of those office holders are above accounting and are above the checks and balances when it comes to being accountable for the money that is the natural God-given resource, is from the natural God-given resource of this country. And still focusing on that natural God-given resource, we look at NNPC. Now, the period in question here is from 2011 to 2017. And if we look back into history, we remember that that was one of the shakiest periods in the relationship between the state commissioners, the states, and NNPC. That was the period where we saw in 2012 the CBN governor at the time, Sanusi Lamido, actually wrote a letter to the president saying that the remittances from NNPC do not make sense. They are not balancing. There's money missing. So it was a very intense period. But it goes back to my initial point that governance is a continuum. If you get it wrong in 2011, from 2011 to 2017, it will still come back to bite you in 2025. If we do not account for the past 6 months in Rivers State now, this period will still come back to bite us again in the future. So we have to ensure that we stay away from this culture of political myopia, where it's my term, my season, what I do is my business, and whoever comes next should deal with the mess that I created. That is not how we build a nation.